Hello and welcome to Business Today TV's pre-budget series where industry leaders and stakeholders from various sectors discuss pressing issues that should be addressed in the upcoming budget 24-25. Today we are discussing the real estate sector, which accounts for around 8% of total GDP. It is also the second largest employer after agriculture. Joining us is Vipul Roongta, Managing Director and CEO of HDFC Capital Advisors, India's largest real estate private equity fund and the world's largest affordable housing platform providing long-term debt and equity financing. Vipul, thank you very much for speaking to Business Today and ahead of what promises to be a very interesting and landmark budget because it will set hopefully the stage for the next 5 years and beyond. Your sector is particularly in the news as, all the time it is, but in particular on the affordable housing piece, the government has announced its intent to really back it up fully, put its entire might behind the affordable housing sector by its first decision itself when he took over. The Prime Minister signed off on that big investment in the affordable housing piece. What is your sense of what the budget is likely to do to boost this space further?
First of all, Saurabh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this platform. You said something about this space being in the news. I think, frankly, affordable housing has generally been in the news for all the wrong reasons, which is unaffordable.
That's
because,
right.
unfortunately, my two bit on that is that generally what media carries is whatever is unaffordable. And the so-called affordable thing is really carried, or for that matter, there is not that much substance and action happening on the ground as is probably required at the economy level. And I'm extremely, extremely happy that the intent, I view that first announcement to be a statement of intent, because ultimately what you have to be able to provide is shelter and quality shelter to not only the rural but more importantly the semi-urban and urban people. And this is specifically true not only for who would be, say, migratory labor or workers, but also for lower and middle class, because the way the prices have gone up, not only in India, globally post-COVID, the way prices have gone up, it is very difficult for an average person to continuously be able to afford unless there is serious supply side initiative. So, long answer to your question, I am very, very positive that there is enough and more that can be done. There is probably infinite demand in this segment. Key is, can we actually supply at the right price?
So how to address the supply side issue then? I mean, will budget address some of the issues?
Ultimately it has to be a private sector led initiative. The way I look at it is that the government, beyond a certain time, can act as an enabler. They can act probably from a broad policy, compliances, approvals, and so on and so forth. But, affordable housing post-COVID is not an India problem. It's a global problem.
True.
As per UN, they say that about 20% of global population is not having adequate housing. That's almost 1.6 billion people. It is a bigger problem in the developed economies than in the developing economies. It is just that it's named differently. In US, it is called homelessness. In UK, it is called attainable housing. We call it affordable housing. Bottom line is that the asset inflation, because of the serious printing of money over the last half a decade, has resulted in asset inflation being significantly more than wage inflation. So the purchasing power of an average person has gone down. So if I have to buy a house, irrespective of which geography, and if we talk in the Indian context, if I have to buy a house from a demand perspective, it is possible only if there is some equity infusion through a relative or a parent or some other asset that I sell. Very rarely is it possible for me to just leverage my income to be able to purchase a decent home. And supply side, to your point, Anand, see, supply side is a complex issue because the problems are pretty standard. Land prices are going up, construction costs are going up. The incentive for a developer is relatively reduced because the premium and the super premium is also selling. So if I can sell a premium home, then why would I actually go and make 50 homes which are not so premium? It's pretty much probably applies to this any industry. There is a premiumization of practically every industry that has happened, including real estate. But the nudge from the government, at least what we expect, so it has to be handled. There are different horses for different courses, kind of a thing. So land, for example, land is often quoted as like, how can you have affordable housing in this city of Bombay or in a metro where the land prices are touching all-time highs? Obviously, the single answer is, can you increase FSI for a particular segment? It can be done by what the government can do is they can give approvals. Like, to give an example, we had the manufacturing issue. So, almost what a time back, the government has started special economic zones. So, one of the recommendations that we are talking about is that today you need to house, if you have to do a manufacturing 2.0, and we have to cater to all these people who are coming to the big cities, you need to have an affordable housing 2.0. So, maybe we say let's set up special economic residential zones where the government allows conversion from industrial to residential land, provided you are making homes of a certain category and size. So, with one stroke, you are able to solve what is probably a land challenge, because most of the industrial areas are now part of the cities.
That's right.
The big cities have grown into those. So, these are pretty approachable. One. Second is incentivizing the developer. There was an ATIB scheme which had been set up by the government, and it had done pretty well. Obviously, it has revenue implications. But I think like the incentive which the government had done in Maharashtra, where the stamp duty was reduced, because the multiplier effect of a home is significantly more in the economy than the so-called revenue leakage on account of stamp duty, which is why, a couple of states had actually reduced their stamp duty, and that resulted in, on the demand side, a big jump on the sales.
So what you may tend to lose there,
what you may tend to lose on a so-called corporate tax loss, you will more than make up in a whole lot of other things that are coming up. So, I strongly believe that ATIB in a slightly better format should be brought in. Third is that most of these benefits are of no use if it is not catering to and incentivizing the top 10% sellers to work in this space. What I mean by that is that we have always defined affordable housing as 60 square meters in the cities and 90 square meters in the tier 2 cities. However, it has to be that none of the units can be more than 45 lakh rupees. Now, in 2014, we were a $2 trillion economy. Today, we are a $3.7, $3.8 trillion, almost $4 trillion economy. Inflation has moved up by almost 70% in these 10 years, from 100 to 170. How can you have 40 lakh rupee home, 45 lakh rupee home as 45? It has to at least be inflation adjusted. Because for me to be able to get any benefit, see, it's a paper benefit. You can give me a benefit, but if I can't make homes of 45 lakhs, more importantly, because the people don't want to buy such small homes, it doesn't help. So, that 45 has to go up to 70, 75, 80 lakhs, because it's not that you have to only cater to the guy who is not having any income, who is not jobless and who is on the road. I think the bigger crowd that you have to take care is everybody who is earning, say, less than 1 lakh rupees a month. So, if I am earning 25,000 rupees a month and I can be just a delivery boy, I can be anything else, or even 20,000 rupees a month, to a person who is a salaried class making, say, 50 to 60,000 rupees a month, we should be able to first.
And you're right, because India has changed. I mean, you have the gig economy, the entire thing of self, the people who are earning on their own. So that, again, if you add all that, the whole, but what you're saying, Vipul, is important, because you're saying that the definition itself of what is affordable housing needs to change.
And just to add, what is doable? I mean, like you talked about the 45 lakh limit, you talk about the incentive, tax incentive, and you talked about that providing land, that SEZ example you gave. In the short term, what is doable? I mean, let's say under the...
So, I think, okay, so if you are talking what is doable from, say, public sector and private sector, let me if the thing is more on the public side. I think what is doable is definitely expecting government to give super tax concessions and incentives and subsidies is not what is required. It has to be a private initiative. It has to come from private capital. What can be done is increase, say, that this 45 lakhs can be increased to 75 lakhs. Today, the GST policy on construction is that it is 5% on construction cost or 1% in case of affordable housing, provided it meets this 45 lakh parameter. Nobody is doing homes for 45 lakhs. So effectively what is happening, the construction cost has gone up because I don't get input credit. Now it's a serious issue. What may appear as just 1% and I'm not getting input credit, actually there are so many other things. So what has to be required is either you increase that 45 lakhs to 75 lakhs so that enough and more people can be taking input credits, or you waive it off or do something on that. So GST, so because construction cost, land cost, and customer reaching the amount of money that I have to spend to reach out to the customer, these are the only three costs to make this thing. Land cost can be covered through a combination of industrial to residential, setting up these special economic residential zones. There can be 3 or 4 other initiatives which we can always discuss. So that's the land part. Construction cost can be covered through a simple thing of this, but it is very important that whenever we talk affordable housing, we don't always talk a 5 lakh rupee home. The limited point is that it is in the urban areas where the affordable and mid-income housing problem is really grave. Average person is traveling 1 to 1.5 hours one way to reach their place of work. So it has to be differentiated between what is affordable housing or cheap housing and affordability, which means cheap cost of living. Cheap cost of living means my house has to be cheap, my distance to my work has to be relatively low, my cost of power, water and basic social amenities has to be low. If you give him a house in the middle of nowhere, 50 kilometers from the city, that is not affordable housing. That is cheap housing.
This other point which you mentioned at the beginning, Vipul, is very interesting also about special economic zones for affordable housing. Now, is that something you or your sector has represented to the government?
I think, frankly, couple of representations have been made, and government has been pretty proactive in reaching out, asking what kind of incentives or what kind of policy initiatives can be done. We have given a representation related to setting up, it can be called anything, but special economic residential zones closer to any industrial zone.
That's right.
Where at least the people who are working in that industrial zone, and today IT areas are also classified.
Yes.
If you are, and you can have grades, you don't have to make only chummeries and dormitories, and you can have a 1-room kitchen, you can have 1 BHK, you can have 1.5 BHK. How Bombay used to be. 20 years back, Bombay used to be 1 RK, 1 BHK, 1.5 BHK and 2 BHK. Now it starts at, I think, 4 BHK upwards. So that has to change.
Right. And Vipul, you gave example of US and UK, on affordable side. Any good practices or anything we can learn from them? Anything good you saw outside which is happening we should adopt here?
I think it's the opposite. Why I say this, today affordable housing or mid and low income housing is a global crisis. The number of homeless people in US are at an all-time high. Unfortunately, we are in our own well that we think that whatever has to be imported needs to be imported from the West. We have recently been invited by a lot of education institutions and think tanks saying that you are doing affordable housing in India on a private sector basis. Can you explain to us what is your model? So I would put it other way, Anand. I think it is time that what we recognize is a basic requirement, which is cheap housing or good quality cheap housing, and we have done some bit to it, is replicated across, because if you are not able to channelize global private capital and local private capital in this space, it is very difficult. because the amount of investment that is required for this, I don't think the respective public sector has that kind of resources. So if it can be done with the minimum return on equity, then it is the game to play. And to your thing about, is there any model that we can do? One model that comes to my mind is actually not extreme west, but just about west, which is, see, we have a lot of our working population in the urban areas, which are migratory. A geography which has similar stuff is the Middle East, where about 70 to 80% of their workforce is migratory. So there they have a policy where they say that if your salary level is below a certain threshold, then as an employer, you are mandated to provide housing to that worker, otherwise you cannot give the job. Now the question comes, where will this housing come from? That housing in turn has been created by the government there as what they call worker housing. So it is leased, it is leased to the corporate and deducted from their salary. So the person who is making it gets a financial, has a good tenant, because you're not leasing it to that worker, you're leasing it to the corporate which is employing the worker. And the worker gets a place to stay and the employer gets a relatively happy employee. Now, obviously the scale there and scale here is very different, but it's something that can be looked at. Having said that, global private capital does not do this housing. Like I was recently in California and we were having some discussion and they said there's a big hoo-ha in San Francisco about doing the mayor inaugurating a affordable housing complex. So inquisitively, I also went and they said, we are donating 30 affordable homes to the city of San Francisco, where they say that the outstanding or the number of homeless people runs in 7 digits. So the point is that the initiative, if you expect the public side to do it, it is not possible anywhere. It has to be private side, and enough and more, at least noise is frankly now being made. Not that much action is happening.
But tell me, Vipul, I mean, you mentioned at the beginning that it was in the news, the sector, for not really the right reasons. What was the reason why you think, there was this whole thing till recently, and I think it still continues, that much of the demand is at the higher end and affordable housing, which is why players are not coming in that number. Now, hopefully, with the government really again giving it a serious push, things will change. What was the problem really?
So very frankly speaking, Saurabh, I don't think the demand is in the higher end only. What is being reported, the devil lies in the details. So let me explain to you. So you would have read enough and more news pieces about number of units being sold in premium segment outstripping the number of units being sold in the affordable segment. Now, anybody who goes to the second level will understand that what you sell is what you launch.
Right.
So it is not that demand for 40 lakh rupee homes have gone away. If the number of units being launched are more than 1 crore, then obviously what will be sold will also be in that segment. So I'll put your thing a little differently. Number of premium homes being sold being more? Yes. Are the number of premium homes being made more? Answer is again yes. Are the number of smaller homes, affordable homes being made is more or less? It is disastrously less. So it's a supply driven issue and not a demand issue. Like if we say in the city of Bombay, will people buy 50 lakh rupee homes at a 45-minute radius to where we are sitting? Answer is that you'll get 20x, 30x application. And we have done this. We have now funded about 120 odd projects. We have funded about 250,000 units. About 100,000 units out of that are below 40 lakh rupees. Another 100,000 units are between 40 and 80 lakh rupees. I'll give a case in example. We funded this company for this Haryana because, real estate is state subject. So ultimately you have to cater and position it according to the region. So Haryana launched a affordable housing policy saying, and this corresponds to that land and construction issue also. They said that you have this piece of land. If you have a piece of land, you come and take a license, provided you make homes which will be as per a standard design and which will be sold at 4,000 rupees a square foot on carpet. Now, it automatically appeared at 4,000 rupees on carpet, you will probably make some kind of a chawl or something which is not exactly very habitable and probably not the dilapidated ones which exist. But that is not what it was. Almost 1.5 lakh odd homes were sanctioned. Significant portion got completed. Only private. Government's only role was to give the license. Enough people came on board. We funded the largest person in that segment. We started with 1 unit, 2 units. We sold 22,000 units where 1 bedroom apartment is 12.5 lakh rupees, 2 bedroom apartment is 18 lakh rupees, 3 bedroom apartment is 27 lakh rupees. And more importantly, it is 15 minutes away from what is the city center of Gurgaon. And this is only in one geography.
So can it become a template, let's say, for the other state?
100% it can, but there are a lot of factors that go into play. I think it's an excellent model that's being created because you are, as a government, doing what you can do best, which is nudging the private sector and giving the necessary approvals. And nothing else was required except everything was private. So,
given the fact that the government has, of course, given its push, how difficult will it be at the state level, therefore, taking off from what you just said, to actually implement, this kind of?
it is obviously not as easy as I'm making it, but it is complicated. Also, what you define as affordable, as we discussed, is complicated. Then you have, it's a fairly unorganized industry on the supply side. Thanks to a lot of regulations and so on and so forth, at least the organization has become, the entire supply side has become much more organized.
But some big names have also come in.
Oh yes,
quite a few.
Very frankly speaking, the big names are today doing more of the premium part, and I don't think the necessary incentive is there to do the smaller one, but it will happen.
What kind of global interest is there, since you are a private equity player and there are other ICICI and other players also? So what kind of players are interested in Indian affordable market, and is it easy to get finance from the global investors?
And what kind of returns can you offer them?
So, frankly speaking, fundraising is fairly complicated because beyond a certain time, the global investor is not really bothered about whether you're doing housing or you're doing commercial or you're doing logistics, as long as you meet a certain benchmark of returns. That's how the global investor ecosystem works. So, first question, is there an interest in this segment? Clearly, there is a huge interest. But that interest stops. It's not like saying, okay, fine, I'm willing to take 5% less return simply because you're doing something which is impacting the local economy. That works more on the development financial institution framework, which is too less. The big capital, which is the private equity, global LPs, they're coming to public market, they're coming to private. So in private market, there's private equity and there's private credit. I think private equity in real estate has traditionally not been done well, especially when you've been taking minority equity. There are enough and more people who burned their hands in the 2005 to 2008 cycle when they took minority interest in different developers and so on and so forth. After that, the industry moved into private credit. It first started with the entire NBFC ecosystem where everybody was setting up NBFCs for real estate lending. That had a meltdown in the post-IL&FS ecosystem. But today, there is enough and more people who are okay with getting, say, a mid-teen return if it is done at scale. That's
the conversation I'm sure you would be having when you said you're meeting investors overseas.
That's right. That's right. That's what is happening. So there is, I think, more than return, what the investors are looking for is scale and credibility of the local partners. Because if we can say that instead of doing at higher cost and deploying, say, $200 million, we can deploy, say, $5 billion, but at, say, 3% lower return, they are happier. Now, the issue is, can I demonstrate the market, can I demonstrate as a manager my ability to deploy that capital profitably? That's fundamentally the issue.
You know, one is also seen because of these issues, some of these larger players who wanted to get into affordable housing, reducing their share of affordable housing, component of their portfolio and going into the premiumization part, which you mentioned. Now, do you see that, gradually coming back after the government's push, or how do you look at the next 2-3 years maybe?
See, I'll answer it a little differently. If I am buying a property in Lower Parel 20 years back, it would probably a mid-income location. 15 years later today or 20 years later today, it is a super premium location. Why? Because of the infrastructure connects of this micro location. There's a Bandra-Worli ceiling which got built, there's the Eastern Freeway, there are a couple of other infrastructure things, the trains have become faster, so all that kind of stuff. Similarly, regions evolve. Now, I can't say, like if I give you an example in the equity market context, if a small cap company has become a mid cap and a mid cap has become a large cap, you can't say that, okay, fine, the investors, which now are institutional investors, a large cap company cannot give you the same returns as the small cap because the risk return ratio is different. Similarly, that applies to regions. So, if what was an affordable location in the outskirts of, say, Parel today, maybe 20 kilometers down the road. So, I don't think we need to get into the thing of getting that developer to sell cheaper. We should get that developer to identify the next zone and make that home. And the government is doing a fabulous job in getting that connectivity part in place. So, as long as I can travel to my place in, say, 30 minutes, my place of work, that's good. So, the infrastructure is increasing that radius of 30 minutes. And we have to then find a developer to, instead of selling cheaper, he should sell at market price only. Because you sell cheaper, it creates a whole lot of other problems. Because then the entire ecosystem will get the benefit. The ultimate beneficiary will not get the benefit.
So the result of this infrastructure will come, let's say, in the 3 to 5 year down the line, and then we will see some moderation in the property prices in the big metros.
No, it is happening because Bombay will see, for example,
So massive
an
changes.
absolute democratization of real estate. Because for the first time, the average Bombayite is understanding what infrastructure and traveling in 20 minutes means.
The coastal road, the entire.
So the premium that I would give to a location in Bombay will reduce. And I would not mind going 5 kilometers down the road and getting a slightly bigger home for the same value. So same thing applies to the developer on the supply side. He will not mind going down the road in 10 kilometers and buying a land because now that it's already happening. It's already happening.
Another thing you mentioned about the private market, and if I look at the public market, and one of the experts was telling me the combined market cap of all the listed developer is less than 10 lakh crore.
About 7.5 lakhs.
7.5. It's less than, let's say, a market cap of ICICI or any other big corporate. Why this lackluster interest from investor in this listed space? I mean, despite they are focusing on the right segment.
See, we basically do financing on the supply side. So I have a little bit of a soft corner for an average developer. So don't mind my bias to it, but a developer today is probably the enemy number one of whether it is public or it is the local authority or it is the media or it is anybody, because any profit which they think he makes, which is more than what they think he deserves, is probably being made not the right way. Why I am saying this? That in turn is a reflection on governance. And obviously the industry has its own unorganized loop. It has gone through its own churn, if I may put it this way. So in 2008, real estate stocks as a percentage of market cap of the stock market was as high as 6%. It went down to as low as 0.6% 3 years back. So real estate stocks as a percentage of market cap. Today, it is about 2.5%. So one way of looking at it is it will come 5 times as compared to 3 years back. The other way of looking at it is that real estate as a percentage of GDP is still about 8 to 8.5%. And why should this still be only 2.5? Single word answer is lack of credible players. Why investors have not, see, investors look for credibility. They want predictability, they want credibility. I think now that the so-called
The RERA and
corporatization
With
everything.
RERA, IBC and all that.
and all these things, RERA, demonetization, IBC, everything has helped in making the industry more organized.
I mean, real estate was almost something you really felt scared to approach in terms of the sector itself. But today, and with listed entities also now.
No,
More
you
and
can
more
see
listed
there
entities.
is a lot of corporates are entering into real estate.
Hmm.
And they
And
would
large
not want to
corporate, big
enter earlier
brands.
because they think that the entire process of approvals and getting getting the entire development plan in place is complicated. That is not happening now.
And therefore,
Enough
the
and more are
governance,
coming into
and
it.
therefore, the governance levels obviously will increase when you have listed companies, bigger names, and bigger groups.
You know, we are getting a lot of queries. We are, by the way, investors. Wherever we are investing significant amount of debt, we also pick up equity. And I can tell you that it has probably beaten every benchmark and every in return in the last 4 to 5 years because the entire sector has got re-rated. Now, how much it continues and all is a matter of more of individual specific script. But I think it's there that real estate will finally, if the governance factor is in control, that it gets its merit of at least having their place at the podium, even if there are 10 people on the podium.
But tell me, Vipul, is there a scope for some new kind of instruments to be created around affordable housing itself, listed instruments which can make that sector even more attractive for investors?
Very frankly, yes. As I said, there are different horses for different courses. We cannot have only a single solution of providing good quality, cheap homes. I think capital market can play a very big role in helping the demand side of affordable housing. And how that can be done, recently SEBI has taken out a small and medium REIT regulation,
Right.
which is targeted more on the rental income and kind of fractionalizing, say, the rental income so that an average person can access rental income as a saving instrument. But there is a proposal that we are working on where we are saying that can we actually use that as a path to ownership of an affordable home. So imagine today if you have 10,000 rupees or say 1 lakh rupees, you can put it into a stock market, you can put it into a mutual fund, you can put it into a debt instrument, you can probably put it into gold, both physical and digital, but you cannot put it in real estate. The only real estate you can do today is buying probably a real estate stock or buying a real estate REIT, which also has a minimum amount. But what if tomorrow you are actually able to buy a tokenized home? Now it's happening in second homes in a certain manner where homes are getting fractionalized.
Fractional ownership, essentially.
So it's happening in the fractional ownership, but that's happening in a premium segment. I think the same thing can be replicated for affordable home. So tomorrow if somebody gets a bonus and he says, I want to invest in my house, but maybe 10,000 rupees at a time so that I can use it over the next 5 years. It is something which can be path breaking. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world, but I genuinely feel that there are enough models, especially in housing, that India is doing, which are probably India first, rather than looking at the West to understand their stuff.
That's right. And India is, in that sense, the melting pot, the cauldron, where many of these experiments can actually start off. This is a very interesting and important one. Probably the government will hopefully be listening to some of your suggestions.
No, I think we have a very proactive regulator, at least on the capital market side. Our experience with SEBI has been exemplary.
This would be a SEBI thing, of course. So we are running, out of time, Vipul. I would wanted to ask you one major last question. That as we look towards the budget, and with the government's again coming back to the kind of push the government wants to give to affordable housing, real estate in general, and that is the demand of the day. What are the 2 or 3 things you would like the government to do in this budget which will really give a push to real estate and therefore to jobs and employment and the whole thing, because real estate is really a huge multiplier?
So, as long as housing can be pushed, the multiplier effect will take care of all the other factors, whether it's job and so on and so forth. And for this, I would say that the government has to do something about what is happening on the GST. The definition of affordable housing has to change for it to be more wide-based. I think enough and more needs to be, has been said about ATIB, which is providing fiscal incentives to the suppliers, because it is clearly a supply side issue. It is not that the buyer doesn't have the money to buy. Yes, at the lower segment, there needs to be intervention, whether it is in form of CLSS, whether it is in form of other fiscal incentives that can be given. But I think it's a supply side. If you don't create the supply, where will that person buy it from? Exactly. I may dump enough money on the individual, but if I'm not able to give quality homes at the right places, it's not going to work. So I think it's more a supply side issue than a demand, and the supply side factors from the government are critical.
And the right places, like you said, that is critical. Thank you very much. Let's hope the government listens and we have some interesting moves in the budget which will give a bigger boost to the sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.